The Virginia colony stretched endlessly under the heavy summer sun of 1600, its red clay soil stained with sweat and blood. The Hargrove plantation rose from the tobacco fields like a monument to ambition, its white columns gleaming against the dark green of the surrounding forest. Here, in this corner of the New World, 200 souls labored under the weight of chains and law, their bodies bent to the will of one man, Master Edward Hargrove. Samuel had been born in the slave quarters 18 years ago, his mother a woman from the African coast who sang songs in a language no one else remembered. She died when he was 12, leaving him with her intelligence, her defiance hidden behind careful eyes, and a mind that absorbed everything it witnessed. The overseers noticed early that Samuel was different. He learned English faster than the others, could calculate weights and measures in his head, and possessed a quiet dignity that made grown men uncomfortable. Thomas Hargrove came into the world 3 months after Samuel, cushioned by silk and privilege. The master's only son, heir to everything the plantation represented, he grew up in the great house with tutors from England and expectations heavier than any physical labor. His mother had died in childbirth, leaving Edward Hargrove with a legacy to protect and a son to mold into his image. But Thomas was not his father. The boys first met when Thomas was 7, sneaking away from his Latin lessons to explore the stables. Samuel was there, mucking out stalls, his small hands moving with efficiency beyond his years. Thomas watched from the doorway, fascinated by this boy his own age, who moved through the world so differently. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. Samuel looked up, assessing the risk. "Samuel, young master." "Just Thomas," the white boy said, stepping inside. "I hate young master." Over the years, their paths crossed in ways that seemed accidental, but became increasingly deliberate. Thomas would find reasons to visit the stables, the tobacco-drying barns, anywhere Samuel might be working. They spoke in whispers, sharing observations about the world around them. Samuel taught Thomas the names of birds and how to track deer through the forest. Thomas shared books, teaching Samuel to read by lamplight in hidden corners of the property. By the time they were 16, something had shifted between them. What began as childhood curiosity had deepened into something the plantation's rigid hierarchy had no language for. They were careful, always aware of the eyes watching, the consequences waiting. But in stolen moments, in the woods beyond the fields or the darkness of the tobacco barn, they built a world that existed outside the one that sought to keep them apart. The trouble began in the spring of 1600, when Master Hargrove announced Thomas would marry Caroline Pemberton, daughter of a neighboring plantation owner. The union would double their landholdings, secure their position in the colony's emerging aristocracy. Thomas said nothing during the announcement, his face a mask his father approved of. But Samuel saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. That night, they met in their usual place, a clearing deep in the forest where ancient oaks created a cathedral of shadows. "I can't do it," Thomas said, his voice breaking the silence like a stone through glass. "I can't marry her. I can't live the life he's planned." Samuel stood close enough to feel the heat of Thomas's desperation. "You don't have a choice. Men like you never do, not really. Just different kinds of prisons." "Then come with me," Thomas whispered, the words tumbling out as if they'd been waiting months to escape. "We'll leave, go north or west, somewhere they can't find us. You're talking madness. They'll hunt us. Your father will never stop." "Then let him hunt." Thomas grabbed Samuel's hand, and in that gesture lay everything they couldn't say in daylight. "I'd rather die free with you than live in a cage without you." The decision crystallized over the following weeks. They planned in whispers, gathering supplies, studying maps Thomas stole from his father's study. Samuel listened to the other slaves talk about the Underground Railroad that didn't yet exist, about settlements in the mountains where runaways sometimes survived, about the Spanish territories to the south where laws were different. On June 15th, as a summer storm gathered its fury over the plantation, they made their move. Thomas left a note on his pillow, brief and devastating. "I cannot be who you need me to be. Forgive me." He took his fastest horse, 2 pistols, a bag of gold coins, and his freedom. Samuel simply vanished from the quarters during the shift change, slipping into the storm like smoke. They met at the river crossing, both drenched and shaking, the reality of what they'd done settling over them like the rain. Behind them, lanterns began to flicker across the plantation as the alarm spread. Ahead lay only darkness and the uncertain promise of something better. Thomas looked at Samuel, rain streaming down his face. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," Samuel admitted, "but I'm done being a ghost in my own life." They spurred their horses into the night, the sound of their hoofbeats swallowed by thunder, leaving behind a world that would never understand what they were running toward, only what they were running from. If you want to discover what happens next, don't forget to like and follow the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Dawn broke over the Hargrove plantation like an accusation. The overseer, Jacob Brennan, discovered Thomas's absence first, his shout bringing servants running from every corner of the great house. Master Hargrove stood in his son's empty bedroom, holding the note with trembling hands, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something darker. "Search the grounds," he commanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "Every building, every field, now." But it was the discovery in the slave quarters that turned confusion into something more sinister. Samuel's bunk was empty, his few possessions gone. Old Martha, who'd helped raise both boys, saw the calculations happening behind Hargrove's eyes and felt her stomach turn to ice. "That boy took my son," Hargrove said, each word precise as a knife cut. "That slave kidnapped Thomas." Martha opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. The truth would only make things worse. She'd seen the way those two looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. This wasn't kidnapping. This was something the master's mind couldn't comprehend, something that would get them both killed if they were caught. The plantation erupted into chaos. Overseers dragged slaves from the fields for interrogation. Dogs were brought in, their baying echoing across the tobacco rows. Brennan organized search parties, riding out in every direction, pistols loaded and purpose clear. The story Hargrove told was simple and damning. His son had been abducted, coerced, stolen away by a slave too clever for his own good. But 3 days into the search, something strange happened. A traveling merchant arrived at a crossroads tavern 20 miles north, telling a curious story. He'd encountered 2 young men on the road, traveling together on horseback. One white, one black. The white man had paid for supplies with gold coins and spoke with education and authority. The black man rode beside him, not behind him, and carried himself with the bearing of a free man. They'd been heading toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, the merchant said, and seemed to know exactly where they were going. The story reached Hargrove through his network of informants, and it didn't fit the narrative he'd constructed. An abducted son wouldn't be riding peacefully alongside his captor, wouldn't be paying for supplies and drawing attention, unless... Hargrove dismissed the thought before it could fully form. His son was no deviant, no pervert. Thomas had been corrupted, bewitched by that slave's unnatural intelligence. That was the only explanation his world allowed. But whispers spread through the slave quarters, carried on the wind of hope and horror. Some said Samuel had worked roots on the young master, African magic from his mother's people. Others, braver or more foolish, suggested something else entirely. Old Martha knew the truth, and she prayed for those boys every night, knowing prayer was all she had to offer. In the mountains, 60 miles from the plantation, Samuel and Thomas had found temporary refuge in an abandoned trapper's cabin. They'd ridden hard for 3 days, sleeping in shifts, always listening for pursuit. The cabin sat in a valley so remote it might as well have been another world. Thomas chopped wood while Samuel hunted. their roles reversed from everything they'd known. At night, they sat by the fire and talked about everything they'd never been able to say before, about the weight of expectations, the prison of skin color, the impossible dream of simply being allowed to exist. "My father will never stop looking," Thomas said one evening, watching flames dance in the hearth. "You know that, don't you?" "I know." Samuel cleaned the rabbit he'd caught, his hands steady. "But every day we're free is a day we win, even if it's only one day. I want more than one day." Thomas moved closer, and in the firelight they could almost believe they were safe. "I want a lifetime. Then we keep moving, west, toward the frontier. Find a place so far from Virginia they'll never think to look." But fate had other plans. A week into their refuge, fresh tracks appeared near the creek. Bootprints too large to be either of theirs, and marks suggesting at least 3 men, possibly more. Samuel found them at dawn, his heart dropping into his stomach. "Someone knows we're here," he told Thomas. "We have to leave, now." They packed in minutes, years of vigilance making them efficient. As they led their horses up the mountain trail, Samuel looked back once at the cabin, at this brief taste of peace. Behind them, barely visible through the trees, smoke rose from a campfire that hadn't been there the night before. The hunters were closing in. If this story is gripping you, go ahead and leave your like and follow the channel so you don't miss anything from this adventure. The pursuit intensified as summer deepened into a suffocating August heat. Hargrove had hired professional slave catchers, men whose business was tracking runaways through swamp and forest. They were led by Marcus Webb, a hard man with a reputation for never losing his quarry. Webb studied the evidence with cold calculation, and unlike Hargrove, he saw the truth immediately. "Your boy wasn't taken," Webb told Hargrove in the plantation study. "He left willingly. The tracks tell the story. They ride side by side, make camp together, split duties. This ain't abduction, sir. This is something else." Hargrove's fist slammed the desk. "I don't care what you think it is. Bring my son home, alive, and bring that slave back in chains." "And if the boy resists?" The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Hargrove spoke, his voice hollow. "Do what you must, but Thomas comes home." Webb and his men picked up the trail in the mountains, following signs that told a story of increasing desperation. The fugitives had abandoned their horses, probably to move faster through terrain where hoofprints were too easy to follow. They were traveling on foot now, which meant they couldn't carry much. They'd be hungry, tired, making mistakes. Samuel knew they were being hunted before he saw any evidence. He'd grown up watching overseers track runaways, learning their methods, understanding how men like Webb thought. He led Thomas deeper into the wilderness, toward a place old Martha had once whispered about, a settlement of escaped slaves and sympathetic whites living beyond the reach of colonial law. "How do you know it even exists?" Thomas asked as they pushed through dense undergrowth, their clothes torn and faces scratched. "I don't," Samuel admitted. "But Martha said her brother made it there 15 years ago. Said it's in a valley so hidden you could pass within a mile and never see it, called it Freedom Hollow." They were 3 days from the mountains when Webb's men caught up to them. The confrontation happened at dawn in a clearing beside a creek. Samuel heard them first, the careful movement of men trying to be quiet. He woke Thomas with a hand over his mouth, both of them instantly alert. "Stay low," Samuel whispered. "Maybe they'll pass." But Webb was too good. He'd positioned his men in a semicircle, cutting off escape routes. When he stepped into the clearing, pistol drawn, his face showed satisfaction and something like pity. "Thomas Hargrove," Webb called out, "your father wants you home. Come out peaceful and nobody gets hurt." Thomas stood slowly, pulling Samuel up with him. They faced Webb and his 4 men, outnumbered and outgunned. "I'm not going back," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the terror Samuel could feel in his trembling hand. "Boy, you don't have a choice. Your daddy spent a fortune tracking you. You think you can just walk away from your inheritance, your duty, your blood? My blood is my own, and I choose how to spend it. One of Webb's men, younger and meaner looking, spat into the dirt. This is about that slave, ain't it? You gone and let him corrupt you, make you into something unnatural. The word hung in the air like smoke. Thomas felt Samuel tense beside him, saw Webb's eyes narrow as pieces fell into place. Jesus, Webb muttered, that's what this is. This is freedom, Thomas said, squeezing Samuel's hand openly now, past the point of hiding. Something you'll never understand. Webb raised his pistol, aimed at Samuel's chest. Let him go, Thomas. Walk toward me right now, or I put a bullet in him, and we take you home over his body. Time crystallized into a single, impossible moment. Samuel looked at Thomas, saw everything they'd risked reflected in his eyes. Behind them, the creek murmured its ancient song. Above, dawn birds began their chorus, indifferent to human drama. No, Thomas said simply, stepping in front of Samuel. You'll have to shoot us both. The standoff lasted an eternity and a heartbeat. Webb's finger tightened on the trigger, his men watching, waiting for the order. But something in Thomas's face, some absolute conviction, made Webb hesitate. That hesitation saved their lives. The arrow came from the forest, silent and precise, embedding itself in the ground 3 feet from Webb's boot. Then another and another, forming a line that needed no interpretation. Webb's men spun, searching the trees, finding nothing but shadows and leaves. Lower your weapons, a voice called from the forest, deep and commanding, or the next arrows find flesh. Figures emerged from the undergrowth, men and women of various colors, all armed, all moving with the confidence of people defending their home. The leader was a tall black man with gray in his beard and scars that spoke of old battles. These two are under our protection, he said to Webb. You have 10 seconds to leave this valley. Don't come back. Webb calculated odds, saw they'd stumbled into something bigger than a simple slave recovery. He holstered his pistol, gestured to his men. This ain't over, Thomas. Your father... My father, Thomas interrupted, no longer has a son. Tell him I died if you want. Tell him anything, but I'm not his anymore. Webb and his men retreated, knowing when they were beaten. As their footsteps faded, the leader approached Samuel and Thomas, his stern face breaking into something almost like a smile. Welcome to Freedom Hollow, he said, though I'm guessing you two have quite a story to tell, and if you want to continue discovering what happens, follow the channel now. Each chapter brings new revelations. Freedom Hollow existed in a pocket of the world geography seemed to have forgotten. The valley was accessible only through narrow passes, easily defended, surrounded by mountains that discouraged casual exploration. Here, 53 souls had built something impossible, a community where the laws of the colonies didn't reach, where black and white lived as equals, where love and labor weren't determined by the color of skin. The leader who'd saved them was Jacob Freeman, who'd escaped bondage 20 years earlier and spent 2 decades building this sanctuary. He listened to Samuel and Thomas's story without judgment, his weathered face revealing nothing until they'd finished. You understand what you've done, he said finally, what you've given up, what you're risking, not just for yourselves. We understand, Samuel said. Do you? Jacob's eyes were hard, because in 6 months, maybe a year, Thomas's father will come again, with more men, more guns, and when he does, he'll burn this valley to ash trying to get his son back. You've brought war to our doorstep. The weight of that truth settled over them like a shroud. They'd been so focused on their own freedom, they hadn't considered the consequences for others. Thomas spoke, his voice carrying an authority he'd inherited but never wanted. Then we'll leave. Tonight. We won't let our presence endanger anyone. Jacob studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. Too late for that. Webb saw this place, saw us. The secret's already compromised. Question now is what we do about it. Over the following weeks, the community debated. Some wanted to abandon Freedom Hollow, scatter before Hargrove could mount an attack. Others argued for fortification, for fighting to protect what they'd built. The discussions were heated, passionate, revealing fractures in what had seemed like a unified community. Samuel and Thomas worked alongside everyone else, proving their worth through labor. Samuel's intelligence impressed the elders. Thomas's education provided resources they'd lacked. Slowly, grudgingly, they were accepted not as visitors, but as members. But the shadow of pursuit never lifted. Letters arrived through the underground network, brought by sympathizers who risked everything to maintain communication with the outside world. The news was grim. Hargrove had petitioned the colonial governor, claiming his son had been abducted by runaway slaves. Rewards were posted. Militias were being organized. "He's making you into a martyr," Jacob told Thomas one evening. "Telling everyone you were corrupted, stolen, perverted by dark forces, building a narrative that justifies whatever violence comes next." Thomas read the proclamations with sick recognition of his father's tactics. This wasn't about getting him back anymore. This was about maintaining the social order, crushing an example of what happened when that order was defied. "There's something else," Sarah, one of the settlement's founders, said quietly. She was a white woman who'd fled an abusive husband and found purpose in Freedom Hollow. "We've heard rumors. Other plantations are getting nervous. If it can happen to Hargrove's son, it can happen to anyone. They're talking about new laws, harsher punishments for runaways, restrictions on who can be taught to read." Samuel felt the weight of every life that would suffer because of their choice. "We're making everything worse." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're forcing them to show their true face. The violence was always there. You just made it impossible to pretend otherwise." The crisis came in October when scouts reported movement in the passes. Not Webb this time, but something worse. A military expedition, 50 men with cannons and supplies for a prolonged campaign. Hargrove had convinced the governor that Freedom Hollow was a threat to colonial security, a nest of rebellion that needed to be destroyed. The community had days, maybe a week. That night, Thomas made a decision. He found Samuel in the cabin they shared, both of them exhausted from a day of preparation. "I'm going to surrender," Thomas said. "Go back. Tell them you forced me, held me captive. Give them the story they want." Samuel's response was immediate and absolute. "No. It's the only way to save everyone. Once I'm back, my father will call off the attack. And what happens to you? You marry Caroline, live the life you ran from, die slowly inside that prison? Better than everyone here dying because of me." Samuel grabbed Thomas's shoulders, forcing him to meet his eyes. "You think you're the only one who made a choice. I chose this too. I chose you, and I'll be damned if I let you sacrifice yourself for some noble reason when we both know you'd just be going back to slavery of a different kind." "Then what do we do?" Jacob had been listening from the doorway. He stepped inside, his face grave. "We fight. Not because we can win, but because some things are worth dying for. This place, what it represents, is one of them." The settlement spent 3 days preparing defenses, knowing they were inadequate against military force. They sent the children away, deeper into the mountains, guarded by those too old or young to fight. Those who remained did so with open eyes, understanding the probable cost. On the morning of the 4th day, the militia arrived. If you're curious about the outcome of this story, don't forget to like and activate the channel's bell to follow the last chapter. The militia commander was Captain Robert Hayes, a professional soldier who'd fought the Spanish and had no patience for what he considered a fool's errand. He surveyed Freedom Hollow from the ridge, seeing not a military threat, but a collection of desperate people clinging to an impossible dream. Hayes requested a parley before the attack, and Jacob agreed, understanding this might be their only chance. They met in a clearing halfway between the settlement and the military position. Hayes, Jacob, Thomas, and Samuel, with armed men watching from both sides. "This is madness," Hayes said without preamble. "You can't win. I have cannons, trained soldiers, supplies. You have what? Hunting rifles and desperation. We have something worth fighting for," Jacob replied. "Can your men say the same?" Hayes studied the four of them, his gaze lingering on Thomas and Samuel standing side by side. He'd read the intelligence reports, knew the story, and unlike many of his contemporaries, he possessed enough imagination to understand what he was really looking at. "Master Hargrove wants his son returned," Hayes said. "That's my only objective. The rest of you can disperse peacefully." "I'm not going back," Thomas stated. "I'd rather die here than live one more day as my father's property." "You realize you're throwing away everything. Your inheritance, your family name, your place in society. I'm claiming something better, my own life, my own choices." Hayes turned to Samuel. "And you've condemned yourself to death, you know. Even if you survive today, you'll be hunted until they catch you. A black man and a white man, together like you are, there's no place in the colonies that will accept that." "Then we'll make one," Samuel said simply, "or die trying." Something in Samuel's absolute conviction made Hayes pause. He'd spent 30 years following orders, enforcing laws he'd never questioned. Looking at these four people, seeing the determination in their eyes, he found himself questioning for the first time. Hayes walked back to his position without another word. His men waited for orders to attack. What happened next would be debated in letters and diaries for decades after. Captain Hayes stood before his men and made a choice that would end his military career, but save his conscience. "We're withdrawing," he announced. "This isn't a military objective, it's a domestic dispute that doesn't warrant the lives of good soldiers." His lieutenants protested, cited orders from the governor, reminded him of duty and consequences. "My duty," Hayes said coldly, "is to defend the colony from genuine threats, not to fight a father's battle because his son chose freedom over obedience. We're done here." The militia withdrew, leaving Hargrove's representatives furious and Freedom Hollow intact. But Hayes was right about one thing: the victory was temporary. Over the next year, pressure increased. New laws were passed. Militias from multiple colonies coordinated efforts to find and destroy settlements like Freedom Hollow. The Underground Railroad began to formalize, carrying people north toward territories where different laws applied. Jacob made the decision for them. "You have to go, not just from here, but from the colonies entirely. There are French territories to the north, Spanish lands to the south, places where maybe, just maybe, two men like you might find a chance." Samuel and Thomas left Freedom Hollow on a cold November morning, part of a larger group heading toward French territory. They carried letters of introduction from Jacob, supplies from the community, and something more valuable than either: hope that somewhere in this vast continent, space existed for their love to simply be. The journey took 3 months, through wilderness that seemed designed to kill them. They nearly froze in a blizzard, nearly starved when supplies ran low, nearly died of fever in a swamp. But they survived together, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. They reached New France in early spring, presenting themselves as brothers to suspicious officials, using the gold Thomas had carried to establish a small farm outside Quebec. The deception was necessary, the hiding painful, but it was better than death or separation. Freedom Hollow lasted another 5 years before being abandoned, its residents scattering before a coordinated attack. Jacob Freeman was never captured. Legend says he went west, toward territories no European had yet claimed. Hargrove died in 1608, alone and bitter, having spent his fortune searching for a son he never understood. Caroline Pemberton married a tobacco merchant and lived a respectable, unhappy life. And in a small cabin outside Quebec, 2 men grew old together, known to neighbors as brothers. Their true relationship hidden, but their love sustained through decades of careful secrecy. They died within months of each other in 1652 and were buried side by side in ground that asked no questions about why two men would choose to spend eternity together. The story of Samuel and Thomas was never officially recorded. No colonial history mentioned their escape. No church register acknowledged their bond. They existed in the spaces between written history, in the oral traditions of those who knew, in the whispers passed down through generations of people who understood that love, in all its forms, will always find a way to exist. Their legacy wasn't in documents or monuments, but in the simple, radical act of choosing each other, despite a world determined to keep them apart. In refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose. In building something true in the face of everything false. And in that choice, in that defiance, they achieved a freedom more complete than any law could grant or any chain could prevent. If this story moved you, leave your like and follow the channel for more incredible stories from the interior, mysteries and hidden secrets that only here you'll find.